At exactly 16 minutes past 4 in the morning, a United States Navy guided missile destroyer patrolling the northern Arabian Sea picked up 4 fast-moving contacts on its tactical display. Almost in the same instant, they came from 4 different bearings. One out of the northeast, one from the southeast, another cutting in from the northwest, and the last approaching dead from the south. At the middle of that closing web of tracks sat a United States aircraft carrier, home to more than 70 aircraft and several thousand sailors going about a routine night at sea. Inside the destroyer's Combat Information Center, the surface warfare coordinator leaned in as the computer worked out speed, heading, and closest point of approach for each contact. 4 surface tracks, all of them accelerating. The nearest was 28 nautical miles out, running at 39 knots. The others held somewhere between 38 and 42. That was too fast for merchant shipping, too coordinated for fishing boats, and none of them were broadcasting an identification signal of any kind. Within seconds, the destroyer's threat library matched the radar signatures to Iranian fast attack craft. Small missile boats built to hug the coastline, sprint in at high speed, and fire before a larger warship could respond. What made this different was that the 4 boats weren't bunched together. They were fanning out, each one claiming its own line of attack, forcing the American strike group to watch every direction of the compass at once. And the timing could hardly have been worse. The carrier was in the middle of recovering its last aircraft from a night flying operation. 2 FA-18 Super Hornets were already established in the landing pattern, a third orbiting behind them with fuel state creeping toward the minimum needed to land. On the flight deck, several jets still sat with fueling hoses attached. Ordnance crews were wheeling weapons carts between aircraft. The elevators were running, and the angled landing area had to stay clear no matter what. The carrier could turn hard if it had to, but not without breaking the recovery cycle and putting already thirsty aircraft at greater risk. At 17 minutes past 4, the strike group commander ordered the formation to close up. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers pushed outward to cover the eastern and western approaches. A cruiser slid in behind the carrier to watch the southern sector. The carrier itself came up to 30 knots, then 32, its hull throwing white water off both sides as it swung 20 degrees to the east. The Iranian boats turned with it. That single detail changed everything the tactical staff believed about the situation. These boats weren't transiting the area. They were shadowing the carrier, matching its every move. On the bridge, the commanding officer watched the repeater display update in real time. Maintain course. Prepare for evasive maneuvering. The order rippled down through the ship. Fueling stopped, hoses were pulled, aircraft were chained down, and the flight deck shifted out of routine recovery mode into something closer to a war footing. Watertight doors swung shut across the ship. Damage control teams took up their stations. Sailors pulled on flash gear and helmets, and the magazines were sealed. The first warning went out over open radio at 18 minutes past 4. Unidentified Iranian vessels. This is a United States Navy warship. You are approaching a naval formation at high speed. Alter course immediately. Silence. The message went out again, this time in Farsi. Still nothing. The 4 boats kept closing, 24 nautical miles, then 22, then 21, and their intentions were becoming harder to mistake. 2 boats pushed aggressively toward the carrier's eastern and western escorts. A third hung back to the north, in a position to watch the whole formation unfold. The 4th stayed south of the carrier and throttled back its radar emissions almost to nothing, which worried the electronic warfare team more than the boats broadcasting openly. A vessel that goes quiet isn't necessarily backing off. Sometimes it's saving its move for last. At 20 minutes past 4, the destroyer's electronic warfare suite picked up a change in the northern boat's radar. The beam narrowed, the pulse rate climbed. It had stopped sweeping the ocean and started concentrating its energy directly on the American formation. Possible fire control radar, the electronic warfare officer reported. The tactical action officer turned to the weapons coordinator. Confirm classification. The system checked frequency, pulse pattern, and antenna behavior against the threat library. And the answer came back within seconds. Fire control associated. The Iranian boat was building a weapons quality track. On the flight deck, the first Super Hornet came down hard, its hook catching the third wire, decelerating from well over 100 knots to a stop in under 300 feet. Deck crews rushed in as the second jet was still on final, so the carrier couldn't begin a hard turn until that aircraft was down. By 22 minutes past 4, the Iranian boats were 17 nautical miles out. The northern vessel kept its radar locked on. The western boat pushed its speed to 44 knots. The southern contact stayed dark. A second warning went unanswered. Then the destroyer's display lit up red. The signal from the north had shifted again, stronger, narrower, continuous. The electronic warfare officer didn't hesitate. Fire control radar, continuous illumination. Every conversation in the Combat Information Center stopped cold. One of the Iranian boats had a lock on the carrier strike group. The range was 17 miles and closing, and the last American fighter was still on its way down to the deck. 2 minutes later, the lock was still holding. The tactical action officer wasted no time on a second guess. Activate electronic countermeasures. Prepare countermeasures. Weapons hold. The destroyer's jamming suite began pumping false range and bearing data into the airwaves around the carrier group. Decoy launchers rotated into position, and the Aegis computers kept building firing solutions on all 4 boats without pause. The range had closed to 16 miles, and the shape of the attack was becoming clear. The northern boat kept its radar fixed on the carrier group, while the eastern and western boats accelerated, stretching the American destroyer's defensive screen wider than it wanted to be. The southern boat still hadn't made a sound. It was waiting for the others to pull the defense apart before making its own move. At 25 past 4, one more warning went out. Iranian naval vessels, your targeting activity is considered hostile intent. Disengage and alter course immediately. Nothing came back. On the carrier, the final Super Hornet crossed the stern at 140 knots, hook catching the second wire, stopping in under 300 feet. Before its wings had even folded, deck crews were already dragging it clear because the moment it stopped moving, the carrier was free to maneuver. The order came immediately, hard turn, and the ship heeled into it, bull cutting northeast as the engines pushed past 30 knots. Tractors locked down aircraft, sailors crouched at tie-down points, exhaust and spray swept the deck. Below, general quarters sounded through every space, watertight doors sealed, fuel lines were isolated, firefighting teams moved to the hangar bay and the magazines. 2 Super Hornets sat armed on the forward catapults with air-to-air missiles under their wings, and an early warning Hawkeye was towed in behind them, its radar already spinning up. Then, the infrared camera on the airborne helicopter caught 2 flashes from the eastern boat less than a second apart, bright exhaust plumes as 2 missiles left the surface. The destroyer's radar picked them up almost instantly. Vampires inbound, bearing 085, 2 contacts. 3 seconds later, the western boat fired 2 more missiles skimming toward the formation at wave-top height from the opposite side. 4 anti-ship missiles now inbound from 2 directions. Time to impact under 3 minutes. The Aegis system split the problem automatically. The eastern destroyer took the first pair, the western escort took the second. Missile tracks and interceptor routes lit up across every linked display in the formation. The first interceptor left its launch cell in a column of fire, a second following less than 2 seconds behind it. On the far side of the formation, another pair fired almost simultaneously. The interceptors climbed hard before turning down into the incoming missiles' paths. The Iranian missiles stayed low, skimming just above the wave crests where radar has trouble seeing past the horizon. That's exactly the kind of approach these boats are built around. Low, fast, and hidden in the clutter, but the carrier wasn't relying on one radar picture. The Hawkeye came off the bow catapult, climbing into the dark as its radar dome began sweeping from well above the horizon, feeding a much wider picture into the network. The first interceptor caught the lead eastern missile 12 miles out, a white flash over the water. Seconds later, a second interceptor took out the other eastern missile. To the west, one Iranian missile lost its lock inside the jamming field, veered off, dropped, and hit the water on its own. The fourth kept coming, slipping under the first interceptor. A second one turned to chase it down, but the missile stayed low and fast, cutting through the sea clutter at better than 600 knots. That's when the southern boat broke cover. At 27 minutes and change past 4, it lit up its radar and fired 3 missiles in quick succession. Their exhaust showed up on the helicopter's thermal camera before the destroyer's radar had even finished sorting them. Additional Vampire's southern sector, 3 inbound. It became obvious then that the first 4 missiles hadn't been the real attack. They'd been bait, meant to make the American ships fire, maneuver, and show their hand. Now there were 7 missiles in the air at once. On the bow, the alert Super Hornet shot off Catapult 1 in a burst of steam, climbing hard. The second fighter was still hooked to Catapult 2 when the carrier swung into another hard turn, tilting the deck under the crew's feet. The missile that had slipped past the outer intercept crossed inside 7,000 yards. A short-range missile system swung toward it, and the close-in gun began spinning up its barrels. And then a new contact appeared on surface radar. Small, moving straight through the middle of the formation, already inside the outer screen. The helicopter's camera locked onto a low black hull, throwing a thin white wake toward the carrier's starboard side. An unmanned explosive boat, range under 2,000 yards. By the time it closed to 1,800 yards, 3 Iranian missiles were still live overhead, and the carrier strike group was fighting on 2 fronts at once. Aegis tracking the missiles above, surface radar tracking the boat below, both closing in on roughly the same few seconds. The nearest missile had already crossed inside the range of the outer defenses, skimming less than 30 feet above the water. The starboard short-range missile launcher swung onto it, its infrared seeker locking the exhaust plume. Track established and fired. The interceptor dropped toward the water and turned hard into the incoming missile's path. They met at a combined speed beyond supersonic, less than 2 nautical miles from the carrier, and the flash lit the dark horizon before burning debris skipped across the surface and vanished into the wake. The second missile came from the south. An escort engaged it with a medium-range interceptor that launched straight up, rolled over, and dove into the missile's path, meeting it at 3,800 yards. It broke apart in midair. The third missile pushed on through the jamming field, its seeker wavering between the carrier's real return and the decoy's false ones. For a few seconds, it seemed lost. Then it steadied and turned back toward the biggest heat source in the formation, the carrier itself, at range 2,600 yards. The close-in gun system locked on automatically, measured the missile's speed and bearing, worked out an intercept point, and swung its rotary cannon onto the starboard quarter. The barrel spun up, and the gun opened fire. A solid stream of tracers walking directly into the missile's path. It detonated just outside the hull. The blast hit the ship with a heavy pressure wave, throwing metal fragments into an antenna housing and across the flight deck, one piece burying itself in a parked aircraft's wing. The missile never reached the ship, but there wasn't time to stop and assess it. The boat was still coming. At 1,200 yards, the black hull was barely visible against the dark water, showing no lights, sending no signal, holding a straight line for the carrier's island. The helicopter dropped down from the southern sector and banked in behind it, too close now to use a missile, with the carrier filling the background, and any blast big enough to kill the boat, risking throwing debris into the ship itself. The crew went to the door gun instead. At 900 yards, they crossed behind the boat and opened fire. Rounds struck the water around the hull. The boat jinked slightly but didn't slow. The gunner corrected and fired again, and this time rounds tore into the forward section, stripping panels off the bow. The engine kept driving it forward, range 700 yards. On the carrier, sailors along the starboard gallery deck were pulled behind armor. Damage control stood by, fire mains were charged, and medical spaces cleared room for casualties. The nearest destroyer was almost 2,000 yards away, on the wrong side of the carrier's wake. Its captain ordered an immediate turn, cutting across the carrier's stern to put his own hull between the explosive boat and the carrier. The maneuver closed the gap between the two American ships to under 1,000 yards, leaving no room for a long engagement. The destroyer's 5-inch gun swung onto the target and fired at 500 yards. The first round hit the water just ahead of the boat, throwing up a wall of spray that didn't stop it. The second landed beside the hull, and the pressure wave shoved the boat sideways, away from the carrier, but its engine recovered, and it turned again. At 300 yards from the destroyer, the gun fired a third time. The round struck just behind the bow, and the boat vanished in a flash of orange fire and black smoke, debris and spray thrown high before burning wreckage rained harmlessly into the sea. The carrier was safe. For the first time since the attack began, the picture was turning in the Americans' favor. The Hawkeye was overhead now, feeding full radar coverage into the formation. 2 Super Hornets held combat air patrol above. The helicopter tracked the position and heading of every remaining Iranian boat. 3 of the 4 were pulling back, 1 wasn't. The eastern boat kept coming at more than 40 knots, its radar still active, thermal imaging showing crew moving around 2 unopened missile canisters on its stern. By 33 minutes past 4, the tactical action officer had reclassified all 4 contacts as confirmed hostile, and the order to engage went out across the network. Above the eastern boat, a Super Hornet rolled into position, the pilot watching its wake, radar mast, and unfired canisters through the targeting pod. The range closed into the firing envelope, and the strike group gave the order, cleared to engage. At 34 past 4, the lead Super Hornet rolled left and dove on the boat 8 nautical miles from the carrier, still doing better than 40 knots, its fire control radar still live. The pilot centered the boat in his targeting display, watching its narrow hull, its radar mast, the wake spreading out behind it. The goal wasn't to sink it. It was to take away its ability to fire again. Target confirmed, hostile, cleared hot. The Super Hornet released a precision weapon and climbed away. The boat turned hard, popping decoys that threw off a cluster of bright infrared flares. The weapon ignored them and struck near the stern, lifting it clear of the water in a burst of flame and smoke, fragments from the missile canisters scattering into the sea. Its speed collapsed from 40 knots to under 10 almost immediately. Its radar went dead, and moments later, it was drifting in a slow, uncontrolled circle. 1 boat down. 3 still in the fight. 20 miles west of the formation, an electronic attack aircraft that had been listening to the Iranian network since the first radar lock began jamming in earnest, flooding the frequencies the boats used to coordinate their search radars and tactical radios. The effect showed up almost immediately on American screens. The northern boat changed speed without the others reacting. The southern boat turned without warning, and the last remaining aggressive boat kept following the carrier's movement, but its picture was falling apart. The coordinated attack had broken down into 3 separate, disconnected contacts. The northern boat was now inside 7 nautical miles of the destroyer covering that sector, driving straight for its port bow. Another warning went out. Iranian vessel, stop your approach, alter course immediately, and got no answer. When its forward gun swung toward the American ship, that was enough. The destroyer's 5-inch gun fired a warning shot that landed less than 100 yards ahead of the boat, throwing a column of water high enough to wash over its bridge. The boat kept coming. At 5 miles, the destroyer fired again, this time striking the aft machinery space, cutting its speed in half. A second hit near the waterline stopped its acceleration for good. It stayed afloat, but it no longer had the power to close the distance. To the south, the boat that had gone quiet earlier began pulling back under cover, radar off, bow swinging toward the eastern horizon. A Super Hornet stayed above it, tracking but holding fire, since the boat was leaving the area and hadn't opened its remaining canisters. The 4th boat made the opposite choice. At first, its turn looked like an attempt to shake the jamming. Then it accelerated. 24 knots, 28, 31. Bow lining up again on the carrier. The helicopter's infrared camera picked up a growing heat source under the center of the hull. It could have been an engine fire. It could have been a missile spinning up. Nobody was willing to wait and find out which. By 37 past 4, the carrier had fully transitioned from defense to offense. The Hawkeye's radar reached well past the horizon. 2 Super Hornets held station overhead. A maritime patrol aircraft coming up from the south picked up the trail on the retreating boat, and more jets were moving toward the catapults. The carrier was no longer tied to a recovery cycle. It could move however it needed to, and its escorts rebuilt the screen around it, while every remaining threat was tracked from the air, the surface, and space all at once. The last aggressive boat kept closing. 12 miles, then 6. The cruiser sent a final warning in English and Farsi. Stop engines, turn away immediately. Failure to comply will result in defensive action. No reply. At 5 8/10 miles, it was still holding 31 knots, its radar flickering on for only a few seconds at a time before vanishing back into the jamming. The destroyer positioned between it and the carrier already had a full firing solution. Steady bearing, closing range, no change in course. The weapons coordinator turned to the tactical action officer. Recommend engagement. It went up the chain to the strike group commander, who watched the track for 2 full seconds before giving the order. Stop that vessel. The destroyer's 5-inch gun fired. The first round landed just behind the boat, drenching the stern in spray, but not slowing it. The second struck the aft machinery space, a flash under the deck. Black smoke pouring from the exhaust vents, and the wake shortened almost at once. 31 knots dropped to 24, then 17. The boat began curling to port, no longer on a straight line for the carrier, but still moving. A third round struck near the bridge, wrecking the steering gear and knocking out power to the fire control radar. Its signal vanished from every American display, and its bow drifted further off course until it could no longer complete its run. The helicopter dropped to 500 feet and moved alongside the crippled boat. Through the infrared camera, the crew watched sailors leaving the bridge, gathering near the stern, no one near the launch canisters, nothing moving on the weapons mounts. Sierra, 44 disabled, no continued hostile activity observed, the crew reported, and the contact was reclassified. Hostile neutralized. All 4 boats were now separated and out of the fight. The northern one had lost propulsion. The eastern one sat burning in a slow circle with its launchers destroyed. The southern one was withdrawing east, still watched by a fighter and the inbound patrol aircraft. The last one had been stopped less than 6 miles from the carrier. None of them had a firing solution left, and none could keep up the coordinated attack. The strike group didn't chase the disabled boats down. The goal had always been to stop the threat, not to hunt down vessels that were no longer fighting. One final message went out in English and Farsi. Iranian vessels cease all hostile activity, remain clear of the United States naval formation. Any renewed targeting or weapons preparation will result in immediate defensive action. Several seconds of silence followed. Then the withdrawing boat bent further east, and the damaged boat switched off what radar they had left. It was over. On the carrier, damage control moved through the flight deck and the outer compartments. The missile that had detonated near the starboard side had wrecked an antenna housing and driven fragments into the skin of one parked jet, bent some safety railing along the way. But the hull hadn't been breached, no fuel line had ruptured, and no magazine had been touched. The ship was fully operational. By 44 minutes past 4, deck crews were sweeping debris from the landing area, fire teams were checking the parked aircraft, and technicians were running down communications and navigation systems. The screen reformed around the carrier, destroyers slid back into their sectors, the cruiser resumed station astern. The Hawkeye pushed its search out past 100 miles, checking for any other aircraft or boats that might still be out there. 2 fighters stayed overhead. The patrol aircraft kept tracking the withdrawing boat, and the helicopter kept recording, building a full picture of the disabled vessels, their damage, and whatever weapons they had left. End. By 47 past 4, the carrier was back on its original heading, still doing better than 30 knots. Its bow pointed straight through the water the Iranian boats had tried to close off. There was no turning back, no change of plan. 4 boats, 4 separate axes of attack, a working fire control radar, 7 anti-ship missiles, an electronic deception effort, and an unmanned explosive craft, all of it thrown at a single formation to force it to fight in the air, on the surface, and across the electromagnetic spectrum at the same time. And still, the defense never rested on any single system. The medium-range interceptors handled the outer threats. The short-range missile and the close-in gun caught what got through the middle. A helicopter and a destroyer finished off the unmanned boat. Jamming tore apart the coordination between the attacking vessels, and precision airstrikes and controlled naval gunfire disabled the ones that kept coming. Every layer did its job so the next one didn't have to carry the whole weight alone. At 49 past 4, the first returning Super Hornet entered the pattern again, its landing lights glowing behind the carrier as the deck crew took their positions once more. It came down, crossed the stern, caught the wire, and far behind it, 3 columns of smoke marked where the attack had ended. The carrier never slowed down. 33 minutes after 4 in the morning, 4 Iranian missile boats had converged from every direction at once, betting that speed and numbers could overwhelm a single American formation before it had time to think. By the end, their formation was broken, their missiles were spent, their coordination had collapsed. 3 of the boats were dead in the water, and the 4th had turned away. The carrier held its course the entire time. It makes you wonder how a crew keeps a level head when the ocean itself seems to be closing in from every side at once. Whether you'd trust the system around you to work exactly the way it's supposed to, or whether in that room with the lights and the countdown, doubt would creep in anyway. Speed can close distance, missiles can compress a timeline down to nothing, numbers can pull a defense in 4 directions until it feels like there's no way to cover them all. But a carrier strike group was never meant to survive on one ship or one weapon. It survives on a web of sailors, aircraft, sensors, and escorts trained to answer a threat before it ever reaches the hull. The Iranians fired the first shot that morning. The United States Navy decided how the story ended.